Okay, let's get started. I think we're just 1 minute to the class, right? Anyway, I think it's wonderful to see all of you. I see some of you from Schwarzman College, some from other parts of the university, and welcome to to this class. I think this is a series, right? I think today I'm asked to talk about China's innovation system, myths and reality, and I think we have about an hour and a half, so I'll try to finish my talk within an hour, and then we'll have about half an hour for Q&A. And here's what I wanted to talk about. First of all, I think it's a more general introduction of the background, and then I'll talk about the myths. Basically, how has China suddenly become innovative, right? I think this is something that people might question. And then we'll have some sort of more of a reality check. What is the status of China's innovation, and what are the strengths and what are the weaknesses, and finally, what are the future prospects, particularly in light of the U.S.-China competition. Any particular things you wanted to add or to subtract from the outline? No? Okay. So let's get started. Have you all swiped your code? Okay, I assume you've done so, right? Okay, great. Okay. I think that, I'm sure that all of you are aware that in recent years, China has been making progress in promoting so-called innovation-driven development. This was started in the 80th Party Congress, and the last 10 years, China has made great strides in this area. And this has generated a lot of concern in the U.S. More recently, I think China is increasingly being viewed as a threat to the dominance of U.S. In science and technology innovation space. But actually, if you trace back, since actually 2007, the U.S. academies have really, published quite a few reports. Were concerned about the status of the U.S. innovations situation. Certainly, I think China was identified as one source of threat, but also there were some other potential sources. So I think that one report called "The Rising Above the Gathering Storm," I think was published in 2007, and later actually there was a few other reports that basically was, I think basically they were arguing that the U.S. have really over the last 15, 20 years have not paid enough attention to strengthen its basis, and the public support for research has been declining. As a percentage of its GDP has been getting to the lowest in 40 or 40 years. I remember when I was a student, first went to the to States to study S&T policy, and at the time, we were told that the U.S. R&D investment, the national R&D investment, usually it's about half, close to half was from public, and about half is from the the industry and so on. But of course, that was the in a way the peak time of the the Cold War, and the U.S. Russia USSR competition, and half of that public spending was related to defense. So there was actually a time when there was a huge investment by the government, but that has been declining since the end of the Cold War. So the U.S. National Academy have been concerned about that, and that was not the case. And of course, I think since the Trump administration came to office, and they also actually have engaged in this kind of trade conflicts with China, and part of that debate was about technology. So I think China was accused of intellectual safety and the forced technology transfer. I think that has been talked a lot about in the media. And I think if we look at the Biden administration, increasingly I think that's still part of the story, but increasingly it's more of a really talking about China as a threat. So I think recognizing the innovation power of China. So really, I think out of this controversies and competition, we have not seen a lot of really so solid research trying to support of this claim. There are many hypes and some without enough sort of reality check. So that's sort of my personal feeling, and I think we also have a lot of people in technology policy area also have similar feelings. There were some efforts, I think, that we have to say that one example is the study led by Graham Allison, at the Harvard Kennedy School. I think they published a report, so-called the Great Tech Rivalry between the U.S. and China. What they've done is they actually look at some particular sectors and really, sifted through the literature and so on, and outlined, which countries in what areas, the strengths and weaknesses. I think that was helpful in terms of really understanding the situation, but still, I think that was not a very, solid in the sense that more quantitative assessment. But it, again, was more of a, sort of really collecting the more of a rather qualitative sort of analysis. So that's sort of the helpful, but still not there yet. So I have to say that this presentation is not in any way a solid, sort of study as well. And so I just wanted to say that, but that's really needed. We wanted to actually have a better understanding of what's really going on, and then before we make any sort of charge and claims. But actually, what I wanted to do is to really examine this issue from the more of a historical perspective. In a way, where has China come from in terms of the progress in science and technology, and also do some again sort of reality check, again using more of a qualitative and some more basic comparison of data, and then see how we can move from here. So I think, given that many of you are working in various fields, and some of you may say, okay, I want to do a project on this, and some others may want to do other things. Well, I know some of you are thinking about doing some study on this, so I think that would be very, very useful. I think that there were actually quite a few years ago, a colleague, I think a foreign friend, asked me the question, how come suddenly China become innovative? So that was something I think really struck my mind. I think I wanted to start with that question, because I think of course she said we know that China is a Shanzhai innovation, right? Copycat of other things. So you would not call that real innovation, right? But suddenly how come? Okay, could somebody get the door? I think somebody's outside there. Yeah. Okay. So I think that's sort of the question I was asking. So I wanted to address that issue. But in a way, if you want to become innovative, you have to spend over 100 years. That would be my answer, because I think a lot of people had the image that China, has been a developing country for many years. So, usually I think when we think about developing countries, particularly a lot of countries, became independent after World War II. They only began to build their innovative capabilities since then. So usually, that's still, very much lagging behind. But in fact, if you trace China's case, it's somewhat actually unique. China actually started earlier, of course, in laying the foundation for innovation. So I wanted to trace back to 1895 as a starting point. Some people may disagree with me. People saying, China has had many years of, tech, tradition. For example, the four great, inventions, 四大发明, right? Can anybody name of those four great inventions? Okay. Uh-huh. Explosive, yeah, exactly, explosive, yeah. Campus, yeah, okay. Printing, yeah. Paper, okay, great, okay. No, you got the bonus. Okay, yes, okay. Anyway, so but when we talk about innovation, we're really talking about the modern science and technology. I think a lot of historians will say that China began to lag behind since Ming Dynasty. So in a way, a lot of people think Song Dynasty was really the peak in terms of culture, in terms of the innovation and so on. So I would start with 1895, and I'll explain why that's the year, and then sort of going through the the times. So I will sort of started from 1895 to 1978 when China's reform began. So I will focus much more on the most recent 40 plus years since reform, but I will briefly go over the years, and then we'll see how China has progressed over the years. I think actually the 1895 is so important. Was actually that's the time when Tianjin University, the previously Beiyang University, was funded by petition, by request from Xue Lan, who in a way you can say is like Deng Xiaoping was a reformer. That that time Yang Wu Yundong, right? That sort of they began to open up and to to introduce foreign technology and trade and so on. So the Xue Lan, who's sort of like the governor of the northern part of China, in Tianjin, so he petitioned to the emperor to request to establish a Beiyang University. They became sort of the currently I think it's known as Tianjin University. So that's actually began. I think the Beiyang Xuetang began to teach modern science and technology, math, and so on. So I would say that establishment of Beiyang University would be we can say it's the starting point of the modern innovation system in China. Of course, I think at the time there was also many other efforts, including sending a lot of students overseas. For example, this picture was taken of the young people who were sent to U.S. and to other countries to study, and they were really I think very early in their years. Since that time, modern universities actually began to flourish in China. And in fact, despite the chaos and wars in China during the 1930s and 40s, and so by the 1948, China had over 200 universities. Actually, many of these universities actually suffered greatly. I mean, for example, Tsinghua University and Peking University and Nankai University formed so-called the Southwest University in Kunming. So they actually had to settle in the sort of like a village to study during the World War II. So by 1948, China had over 200 universities, and also including so-called some technical colleges, 3-year technical colleges, so-called the Dazhuan, right? That's and with over with 150,000 students. So some probably about some of them are national universities such as Tsinghua, But also there are some other provincial universities, and also there are some private universities. So that's sort of the makeup of those 210 universities. So there you see that sort of the Qiushi Shuyan, that's sort of the Zhejiang University. That's where they were founded. And this was the Southwest, sort of university, Southwest Union University in Kunming during World War II. So that's sort of the modern university system. In addition to higher education institutions, China also began to establish its research institutions. So Academia Sinica was established in June 1928 with Mr. Cai Wenpei were appointed as the president of the Academia Sinica. So this is sort of the appointment, sort of letter, the plaque. By 1935, so before the World War, the anti-Japanese war, there were 70 plus research institutes in China. And by the time of the 1949, only about 30 plus left. And many of them actually moved to Taiwan, but also some of them were, had to, disband during the World War II. So by 1948, there were about 81 fellows of the Academia Sinica. So would be today's so-called 院士, so the members of the Academic Sinica. This is the building of Academic Sinica in Nanjing City. It's still there. It's still there, the building. So that was a quick overview of the, sort of from the 1895 to the 1949, when People's Republic, was founded. So after the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949, innovation system began to enter into a new era of really sort of catching up, building up and catching up. So it's interesting that you can see the Chinese Communist Party couldn't wait to establish Chinese Academy of Sciences. So actually, if you look at the dates, Chinese Academy of Sciences was established on September 27th, 1949. So actually, the Chinese Academy of Sciences was 3 or 4 days younger than the People's Republic of China. So you can see that it's really paying such a great attention to science. So in addition to the Academy of Sciences, which was focused on basic research, China also began really sort of learning from the Soviet Union's model, established many applied research institutes at the national level and also at the provincial level. So I think, for example, in different industries, you have a national sort of research institute, say in chemical industry, national research institute in petrol industry, whatever. And also, of course, in different provincial level, or you also have many research institutes. University system also went through some major restructuring. Again, sort of learning from the Russians model, and China created many single-discipline, technical institutes. So Tsinghua University, before that, sort of restructuring, it's a comprehensive national university. But then I think during that restructuring, all the humanities and social science was split to move to Peking University. So, of course, Peking University also split its engineering to move to Tsinghua. And also, some departments of Tsinghua University also split to become a single university. For example, Beihang, now Beihang University, it's from Tsinhua's aerospace, department. So that's moved to become a single university. So many of those departments moved out. So actually, in a way, we can say Tsinghua suffered quite, severely during that restructuring. But that actually was, restructured to really try to fit the national economic development at the time. Because at the time, the major task of the country was trying to industrialize. So you need many, many people of sort of, really sort of technical sort of engineers, technicians, and so on. So the university system was, sort of restructured to meet those demands. I think, again, sort of following the Russian models. And of course, also there's, many of the social science departments just simply abolished. And some left, but, limited. In my field, so public administration was abolished during that time. And also, I think all universities became public. And that's sort of, at the time, it was a socialist country, and so no private universities. Over the years, university system in China have went through ups and downs over the years. And as you can see that 1948, 1952 was the restructuring, and then grew to 182 in 53, and 229 in 57, and then there's a huge jump to over 1,000 in 1960. So the great leap forward is not just the agriculture industry, but also in higher education as well. And then, of course, then so it came down to 400 plus and to 300 plus. So that is, was how the university system has, been changing. In terms of the industrial technology and the innovation, during those years, I think Chinese industrial technology was mainly relying on imports from the West prior to 1949, and then from the USSR after 1949. I think there was actually a major, sort of effort of China importing the, technologies from USSR. In the mid-1960s, China and USSR, actually this is this should be USSR, signed an agreement to introduce 156 major industrial projects into China. So that really actually laid an important foundation for China's industrial development. So here are the two pictures of the projects in China. This picture is interesting. This is sort of the signing of the agreement. There are some major figures in this picture. Can you guys identify who are those people? Who's signing there? On the China side. Zhou Enlai, yeah, Zhou Enlai, yeah, exactly. So who are the people standing up there? Mao. Who is this? Zhu De, yeah. Who is this person? Yeah, from Russia. Khrushchev. Khrushchev. Yeah, Khrushchev. Yeah. So anyway, so it's this is an interesting picture. Yeah. So I think by before the Cultural by 1965, China has established a more than 1,700 research institutes covering all major sort of field with over 150,000 researchers, and really achieved sort of many progress in some important areas. For example, in basic research, there is a so-called synthetic bio-insulin that was discovered by Chinese researchers, and some people actually say that actually it's worthy of a Nobel Prize. But of course, at the time, this is a collective effort, so there was no nomination at all, from China. And also, of course, in the more strategic research, military-related, China, had the atomic bomb, and also in industrial technology, Daqing oil field was discovered, based again on some research in geological research. So I think those are the kind of major achievements that's really showing that at the time China was already beginning to establish some important capabilities. There were also some major setbacks, and the most serious one was the breakup between China and the USSR in this collaboration in science and technology area. I think because of the ideological differences. In 1960, in July 1960, USSR decided to break up with China on S&T cooperation. So basically calling back all its experts and really stopping sending more, and also I think tear down many of those agreements. So that really sort of brought China sort of really left a very strong scar in Chinese S&T system. So I think that basically forced China to turn to a system of so-called self-reliance, and that's still, I think, is still a signature of the Chinese system. In 2003, from 2003 to 2006, there was a major S&T medium and long-range planning, and there was some discussion about what should be the basic principle guiding China's S&T system development. So many sort of older generation of scientists, they basically felt that in the S&T area, you really have to be self-reliant. So they're, that's still, they still remember the days. Also, we know that from 1966 to 1976, and China entered this so-called Cultural Revolution. So the 10 years of chaos, and that actually there was not much progress in S&T area. So in 1978, China began to have its reform. That really made China enter into a new era in S&T development. So I think the first, period of, is, what I call the spring of science. So that's based, on the, Gomeros's speech that was the title. So he said, okay, now we are back to, to the new era of development. And so in 1978, China had this national science conference and really trying to began a new push for developing S&T area. Of course, I think this is a time when also many other reforms have also begun in China. While professors in Tsinghua University began to get back to the classroom and also to the laboratories, do their research, the Chinese economic system has began to change. So first, China had a very successful reform in the agriculture sector, and then later moved to other areas. So there's a huge demand for innovation, for technology. But at the time, the Chinese system was not able to do that, because I think all the people, researchers, they were not interested in working with the industry, and they really wanted to still do their own lab work. So the government tried different things, but didn't work. So I think finally that, in 1985, the government issued a major policy document calling for the reform of the public research institute system. So this system, I think there are many reform measures. I think, it's still very, when we look at now, it's very forward-looking. But I think that the basic idea was to really to push you guys to work for the economy. So cutting the government funding. So I think that's sort of the most useful measure. So basically, 叫断黄粮, 切断黄粮. So I cut the support, government support, and so making you to force you to really get money from the market. So that actually really has worked in a way, changing really the whole landscape of innovation. So here is the Zhongguancun area, before the reform, and here's today now. You can see a dramatic change, and this is the headquarters of Legend when it started. So it's a a very shabby sort of a small house, but now it's a huge building there. So there was really a huge change through this reform. The second wave of change really happened in the starting in 1998, when there's a so-called global so-called knowledge economy that was emerging, and also there was many government reform. So this is a time when actually the second wave of change began. I think the basic idea is to really clarify roles played by different institutions, and making sure that indeed, there's a division of labor among the institutions. Because I think the first wave is everybody, get to the market, including I think the, math research institute or whatever, physics research institute, just go and try to get money from the market. So now I think in this reform, really trying to clarify the roles so the CAS, basically the Chinese Academy of Sciences, is saying we are actually doing basic research, so we call so-called the knowledge innovation program that actually relied on government support. So basic research need to be supported by the government. On the other hand, other research institutes, in the past, they were still getting some money from the government and trying to get other money from the market, and this reform just pushed them to the market. You guys just, stand alone, become an enterprise yourself. The third wave of change really happened after China entered WTO. So this was a time when actually there was a need to feel that China need to have a better long-range long-range planning for S&T system. So there's China began to draft the so-called medium and long-range plan, which was published in 2006, and basically trying to promote indigenous innovation, and try to make China an innovation-based country in 2020. I still remember those days. We felt, oh, that's a long time away, and now it's just suddenly, we're back here. And also, I think there was a lot of research programs planned, and also some mega research projects also was planned. 16 mega research projects, and also there was a lot of reform measures and so on. So that was a major effort during this third wave. The fourth wave really started in 2013 when actually China began to push for the so-called innovation-driven development. So there's many reform on the management of national R&D programs, and also there was so-called the massive innovation and entrepreneurship, so 双创. That also was a major policy, pushed by the government. So that's a quick overview of the, what happened, since 1895 to today. So if we look at the, how China gets here, it's really, I think there's over 100 years accumulation of capabilities, and of course also particularly since China's reform in 1978. So China actually pursued the two-wheel strategy. One is to open up to the outside world and collaborating with global innovation systems. The other is more of a reform. So I just outlined very briefly of the four major waves of reform that really try to make Chinese innovation system more better, more efficient, and more geared towards the economic development. So now reality check. Let's first look at what are the successes. First of all, I think China has a sustained growth in R&D investment. I came back in 1996. When I came back at the time, the policy discussion was how we can increase R&D investment in China. And there was people talking about how we can actually have maybe written that into law, and how to guarantee the R&D spending would be catching up with the economic development. And but now actually, if we look at the overall investment in R&D, China actually is probably you will see that probably is the second largest R&D spender, and the R&D intensity, meaning R&D investment as a percentage of a GDP, is 2.44, which is relatively high. I think it's higher than the average of the EU countries. So I think it's quite high. And also I think there's a much greater role of industrial R&D, because I think a lot of people think of China as government is the major driver for innovation. But the reality is that if you look at the R&D spending, 3/4 of China's R&D spending was actually by the industry. So industry actually played a critical role in that innovation movement. And also there's a rapid growth in R&D output in terms of papers and patents. I will have some data, and also greater participation in the global innovation system. China had many multinational R&D centers in China, and also lots of joint publications. Also massive expansion of higher education. So the growth enrollment rate in 1990 is 3.7. Today's close to 60%. And also, of course, there are many globally known institutions. So, so I'm actually using one of the Academy's reports that was published in 2020. And this report actually was published by the U.S. Academy of Arts and Science. They are comparing the U.S. and China to see how the two countries, what are the differences and what are the progress that has been made by China. So this is the first is gross expenditure in R&D. You can see that the blue line was by the U.S., spending by U.S., and this red line is by China. According to this picture, actually now China has surpassed the U.S. But remember, this was using PPP, so not the current dollar. If you're using current dollar, I think China is still lagging behind the U.S. But it basically shows that China has moved very fast, quickly in trying in the expenditure in R&D. This is about R&D, the intensity of R&D investment. Here we see three groups. I think the first group is more of the Korea and the Israel. I think they are actually, the R&D spending is over 4% of national GDP. So this is, they are smaller economies. Most of the economies in U.S. and Japan, other major innovative countries, are around 3%. So I think they're in that space. And China is over 2%, so somewhat lagging behind, but it's still moving steadily, to catch up. Articles, publications, in terms of the global share of articles, scientific publications, China has surpassed U.S. in about 2016 as the largest, so the country publishing largest amount of scientific papers, and I think now approaching close to the major European countries, some. Also, doctorate degrees, I think that this is China and this is U.S. I think again, so China is catching up quickly. Patent applications, and this is China's application. This is the rest of the world. But I think here we do have to remember, China has three types of patents. Invention patent is one of them, but also there are two others, design patents and utility patents, which are less useful and less significant. So I think that that may skew the data a bit. And this is a granted patent. Again, China was way up there, and this is the U.S. and other countries. Number of companies in global Fortune 500, and here's the blue bar is the U.S., red bar is China, and you can see over the years has been catching up. So this is the timeline, I think, according to this report, of when China passed the U.S. Giving up the specific dates and the issues. So basically, this report is, in a way, I think I think of this as a sort of these scholars, efforts trying to push for the government to recognize the threat and to invest in the U.S. innovation systems. But also, I think I gave all this great achievement and so on. But also, there are many sort of regrets. I think the first thing is China is still lagging behind in really top-notch sort of research. One example is the Nobel Prize, right? I think a lot of people say, oh, China is really interested in Nobel Prize, but still we see that every year that it's still, I think China is still waiting to have some more current research being awarded. China now does have one, I think, 2UU, but that was many years ago's work. So if we look at this graph, we see that in this sort of top 1% cited publications, if you look at this, I think U.S. is still way ahead of any other countries. I think China is catching up, but still it's quite a gap there. So I think that in terms of the leading the research, in terms of the cutting edge research, the U.S. is still the lead. There are also still quite some innovation gaps in critical technology areas. And here that if you see this, this is sort of China's trade in IC industry, the chips that generate so many controversies in recent years. You can see that China certainly over the years imported a lot of chips, also exported some, but the trade deficit is growing. But suddenly here you see the trade deficit dropped, but not because China was more successful, but rather because of the U.S. sanction on China. So China was not in many high tech, so the best chips was not allowed to import. So there you can see that still in many other areas also in sort of the leading technology, China is still sort of lagging behind. Also, I think that we know that China has been the manufacturer of the world and has very strong manufacturing capabilities. But in terms of brand names, if you think of the years, you remember when Japan was emerging over the years, we know many sort of Japanese brand names, right? Sony, Panasonic, and so on. What about the Chinese names, brand names? Can you name a few of our international students? Huh? Xiaomi. Oh, Xiaomi. Okay. Yes, indeed, Xiaomi is. Yeah. Okay, that's good. Tencent. Okay. Yeah. Tencent, Xiaomi, Huawei. Yeah. But still, I think that if you think of the huge manufacturing capabilities, right? Still somehow the names are limited. I mean, Tencent would not be. Well, Tencent also, it's used a lot. I mean, Tencent is are they used globally? Not really, right? I mean, software-wise, globally. Okay, yeah. So Tencent, I think it's certainly also Alibaba, and yeah. So we do have some internet companies actually getting stronger name recognitions. And also, I think the overall productivity of Chinese economy is still relatively low. Actually, if you look at the productivity, China is actually, is still lagging behind many G20 countries. So, in the G20 countries, China is still probably in the few in the back. So I think that. Also, I think that I've talked about these, major reforms, the 4 major reforms, but also actually there are still many more that yet to be completed. So if China really want to be an innovative countries, for example, in terms of public research units, so PSUs, there are many institutional issues that needs to be reformed, so I think now when we check the reality, so what are the reasons why China has been successful and what needs to be improved? I think the first thing, as I mentioned, is the accumulation of capabilities and talents. So in fact, I think this is, that makes China different from many other developing countries. China indeed has had this long history over the years in developing these capabilities. And also the second is more the consistency, a consistent policy support, and a conducive social environment. And first of all, I think that strong leadership, support for innovation, and basically Chinese R&D investment has kept rising since mid-1990s. And also, as we mentioned, that Chinese Academy of Sciences was established ahead of the country, right? I guess we'll just continue. We'll just continue. Yeah. So I think there's a very consistent. So if you look at every sort of leader in China, on science, technology, everybody's very supportive. And also, I think there's also important thing is a very consistent policy orientation. And this is something not a lot of people appreciate. But if you look at most of the major reforms, policies and so on, basically, first of all, it's market-based reform, a competitive mechanism being introduced, and open and indigenous innovation. So those are the sort of key words you see everywhere. And that sort of has been, over the years, that has been quite consistent. And the third, I would say, is more of a conducive social environment. The macro social environment for reform and openness allowed many reforms to go, to take place. I've been to many different countries, and many people just felt it was impossible to have the kind of a, grand reform of the second wave, making over 1,000 public research institutes to make them, become enterprises. So there's, huge, in a way you can say people are laid off from the public sector. You are just, pushed to the market and just to rely on your own. Now that kind of reform was, without this, overall social support, it would be very difficult to implement. And also, as I mentioned, that it was basically the two wheels, sort of reform and openness. So this two wheels really supporting, reinforcing each other. That really allowed the progress over the years. And the other thing, of course, is a hard-working spirit by a whole generation of people who really treasure the opportunity to use their talents for the benefit of the society. I think this is actually the first time for a long, long time in Chinese history that there's such a long, stable period for economic and social development. China, I think, since Opium War has entered into this very tumult, it's a very, huge turmoil, war and, so other things. And now I think China finally has this period of time, and people treasure, this period so much. So what are the, future reforms, improvements that's really needed? And I think that I just outlined some of them, but of course I think that many more is probably needed. And the first thing, of course, I think better market environment, because I think innovation really happens in the market. So it's not, it's not in the research labs. When we talk about the innovation in here, it's really how do you turn knowledge into value? And so that's sort of the better market environment is needed. And also more risk-taking in Chinese basic research. Because I think that we really wanted to achieve sort of really top-notch research. It sometimes takes quite a long time. You need to have people who are willing to take that risk. But now I think many researchers in China, they probably don't want to do that. They really want to do something that in a couple of years there will be some tangible outcome. Otherwise, their promotions are endangered. Otherwise, they will not get a tenure at Tsinghua University. Otherwise, they will not, whatever. So I think that how do you really cultivate that institutional, sort of environment to support people who can do this kind of, long-term research? I think it's important. And also, there's a need for strong enforcement of academic integrity to really curb the misconduct in academic research. And also, there's more autonomy to university research institutes and more efforts to cultivate innovative culture. So there are many, many things that's really needed to push for to really bring China to the next level of innovative performance. Now, finally, let me turn to the US-China competition. We're all violating the rules, right? You are not wearing masks. Yeah, I think that given what we've outlined, I think in a way, given China's progress and its potential, I think China's innovation system is really poised to make greater contribution to the global economy. China has already made some important contributions, as we've seen that in 5G, in EV, TikToks and Tencent and many other things. But actually, China can actually make more. In academic publications, China is already the largest publisher in the world. And also, I think China can make a great contribution to address the grand challenge, global challenge, such as climate change. But of course, I think this contribution has been really dampened by the systematic effort by the U.S. government to decouple with China. I think there are, I don't have to outline all the set of things that are being implemented by the U.S. administration. Expansion on the export control, limitation on the Chinese investment, in the U.S., restrictions on the imports, and targeting Chinese companies, and also, investigating American Chinese scientists. So there's a whole set of things that really be implemented. And the most recent things that we all know that there was the BIS sort of sanction, the new sanctions on the Chinese companies. I think that the negative impact on the global STI is tremendous. I think on the first one, the global knowledge production, and I've done some work with my former graduate student on the U.S.-China collaboration. Actually, the U.S.-China collaboration is the strongest among all the researchers, and this is this is in the in bio and medical sort of science area. This is joint publications, and this is the total U.S. publications, and this is the total Chinese publications. This is the joint publication as percentage of that country. So, for example, this is a joint publication as percentage of Chinese, percentage. So it's about 15%, and for the U.S. percent, it's around 10%. This is in the medical science area. This is in the EE, electrical engineering. And here's the situation is that the Chinese publish much more, over 40,000 papers each year, and U.S. is much less. And so the joint publication as percentage of the U.S. publication is something like 30%. And it's, as a percent of Chinese, it's about 10% or so. So I think that, in AI area, I think it's, in AI, it's somewhat, close. I think, this is the Chinese publication, U.S. publication. This again is a percentage of each country. So you see that there's a lot of collaboration among the two countries. And so the effort to trying to contain the Chinese innovation system actually harms the Chinese U.S.-China collaboration. On the global innovation space, I think also there's, I think that because of these restrictions, there's a delaying of the diffusion of new products and services. So, Huawei's 5G, I think, potentially could actually serve many, many more countries, but because of the U.S. Restrictions, and I think actually is not able to do that. And of course, also increasing the cost of production and consumption, and also damaging global value chains. So I think the problem with the decoupling process, I think particularly when you push that to the extreme, it could really become a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? I mean, because I think when you push that, I think we see in China say, okay, now we have to become self-reliant. The more you become self-reliant, the less you'll be willing to collaborate with others. The U.S. is the same. So it's really becoming, a vicious cycle that can actually turn to, sort of this self-fulfilling prophecy into a reality. And in the end, it's going to be a lose-lose situation for China, for U.S., and for the world. So what are the future prospects? What can be done? I think first of all, there are some, some suggestions. I think that reopen or establish channels of communication of multiple levels. I think that pretty much, I think many of those communication channels totally, I think, abolished. I was personally involved in 2010 to 2016, sorry. I was involved in the U.S.-China Innovation Dialogue. That was actually led by the U.S. Science Advisor to the President, and also by the Chinese Minister of Science and Technology. So I was the co-chairs of the expert group for that dialogue. I think that actually was a very helpful mechanism that over those years. I think channels like that either can be extremely helpful. The second thing is that we need to adopt a framework to manage the tech rivalry between U.S. and China. I think there were some examples. I think that this is the one that I produced. I was saying that there was actually prior to the Trump administration, we already have a kind of a kind of framework here. That first of all is when those innovations that enhance defense capabilities or enhancing economic prosperities. So if we look at the two dimensions, for those that has no economic benefits, but mainly enhancing defense capabilities, there's already a so-called Wasena arrangement on export control. So there is actually U.S. and Western countries already have a system to control technology flow from those countries to China. So that was already in place. I think for the more commercial technologies, I think it's no defense, but it's more just economic benefits. This is more WTO under the TRIPS arrangement. So that was more of a commercial technologies. I think on the no defense, no economic prospect, this is a basic research. And there is actually global, sort of international science principle that we can just simply follow. Of course, the more challenging part is this part, that both have the defense capability, the potential for that, and also potential for economic benefits. And this is an area that's sort of more of a cutting-edge technologies that really needs to work out something. And here the other one that was generated by Granger Morgan and David Victor and so on. It's sort of colleagues from Carnegie Mellon University, and they published something in the Issues in Science and Technology. So more or less, really, so saying, okay, let's divide this into two categories. One is this is sort of increasing social benefits, and this increasing political risks because they're considering U.S. political environment, and this is more decreasing. And so here they're divided into 4 different quadrants, and then see how that can be managed. So I think basically the idea is how do we actually find a way to contain the competition, and so not to get this out of hands. And also I think that similarly, I think we also need to establish boundaries for competition, try to minimize negative externalities to the global community, and also to minimize the negative impact on the global value chain. I think that's sort of the thing that we certainly didn't want to see. We've already seen that negative externality in the chip industry. So not only the Chinese companies were suffered, many U.S. companies also, we see their market value has been dropped quite substantially because of the sanction on Chinese chip industry. Also, we need to find a way to adopt measures to reduce distrust and regain sort of confidence. I think that's something that there's a need to be done, and there are also important opportunities. For example, we know that climate change is really looming, there, and John and we know that there's Climate Overshoot Commission that's really trying to look at, indeed, I think maybe there's high risk that we are going to the climate, the temperature, the rise of the temperature will get over 1.5, so-called since the industrial revolution. So if we do get to there, there's going to be many disasters and many costs to the to the global world. So how can actually we find a way to mitigate those issues? And so here there are some technical solutions, but there's a lot of uncertainties related to it. So there's probably one that there's a need further research in those technical areas, but also there's a need for global collaboration in how to govern those technologies. So here, again, there's sort of huge opportunities for U.S.-China collaboration. Another thing is, dear to my heart is, how do we prevent the misuse of AI and other emerging technologies? And here again, the collaboration between U.S. and China is so critical. So I think finally I wanted just to let you guys to think about, imagine what can be achieved if U.S.-China can join hands to tackle the most challenging issues of our time. If that actually can happen, I think what a world we can, sort of waiting for. So let me stop here. I think this is about an hour, right? It's just probably a few minutes over. But let me turn the, to Q&As. So.